Hello, fair listener, or fair viewer, to be fair, if you're watching us online, and welcome to the Emotion at Work podcast, where we place emotions at the heart of the people, the processes, and the place of work. And today we're focusing on how kind of emotions and shows up in leadership, and in particular, what it means to lead beautifully. Our guest today is Dawn Stallwood. Now, Dawn is the brilliant author of the book Beautiful Leadership, which Dawn wrote as a legacy piece to mark her 50th birthday. And she's on a mission to build an army of beautiful leaders to combat the fractured, high-pressured environments that we often see in the corporate world and in the world of work. Having read it, though, it's more than a book. It's also a memorable framework which you can use really to personalize to kind of your context and your life and the challenges that you may be facing. And today I'm really excited because Dawn's going to be sharing her insights on how leaders can build true capacity, how they can slow down to amplify their impact and embrace the beautiful imperfection of leading people. And I'm really excited to welcome our guest onto the air. So, hello, Dawn.
Hello, Phil. Thanks for having me. I'm also excited.
Yay. Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. And it was really kind of you to send me your book ahead of us recording this today. So I feel like I've kind of got to know you a little bit through reading it along the way. So I'm just really excited. I think the listeners are going to get a lot of value out of what we're going to talk about today. So it's going to be good.
No problem.
As always, though, we shall begin with our unexpected yet innocuous question. And so my unexpected yet innocuous question for you today is, if the pressure is on and you're feeling the need to create some capacity, what kind of environments do you choose to put yourself in?
That's a good question. If the pressure's on and I need to create capacity, for me, I tend to do one of two things. I either go into an environment that's unfamiliar to my work, so I might find myself in a very quiet coffee shop to steal myself away, or I might seek to basically get complete peace and quiet. I find sometimes that capacity is impacted by noise for me, and so the busier and more pressured it gets, the more susceptible I am to noise. So I've learned over the years to go quiet. So it might be noise reducing headphones. Those are two things that I definitely do. What I've done badly in the past is extend my day way beyond its bookends in order to increase my capacity. That is not necessarily the wisest of moves. Not if you're doing it sort of on a very regular basis.
Yeah, love that. So is it about being kind of, I don't know if it's novel. Is it novel or just different to kind of the environment that you were in before? So is it that change of kind of context, change of environment that's important?
It's the change of context, that helps. I think also knowing when you're really aligned in terms of doing your best work. So you hear a lot about time blocking and working out your circadian rhythms and when is your most optimum time for working and the type of work that you do. And I think there's definitely merit in that. So, quite often with the background I have, which is a corporate M&A lawyer or mergers and acquisitions lawyer, sometimes you could be 5, 6, 7 hours in a document, and you have to do that at your best time, because if you do that at a time when it's not optimum, your capacity won't be there. So I think it's knowing when your sweet spots in time are as well. That certainly helps. And protecting your time. It's very easy as a leader, and I have advised leaders for nearly 30 years in deals and projects. It's so easy for their time to basically be either held hostage or drained away through things that actually don't really need their time, or not at least in that moment. And so communicating that is really important. If you want me to do this thing well and on an urgent basis, then you have to understand that I can't do these things over here. And so really strong communication will help you build capacity when the pressure's on. People are not mind readers.
No, definitely not. I really like that. So one of the things for me is being outside. I think being outside is a real way of creating capacity. Also being physically active is another one for me. So I find that kind of that the movement bit, which doesn't necessarily have to be outside, but the when I know the pressure's on, moving in some way, I think is it being an environment that encourages that movement or makes that movement happen, then
I think
kind of seems to create capacity for me.
That's a really, I mean, I have a dog, so I walk the dog, and I enjoy the garden, etc. I think sometimes the challenge is when you're, really deep into the work and you can't extract yourself. One of the things that I've done in the past, and I'm building back into my operating model, is actually walking meetings. So literally just grabbing hold of a CEO and saying, right, we're meeting for the next 45 minutes, aren't we? Yes. Okay. Well, then let's meet on a walk. Let's grab a coffee and let's just, even if it's just walking around the block, it's great for them. Feels very foreign, and it's also great for me. And especially these days, where if you wanted to record, you can have gadgets and devices that can record things along the way. So you don't even need to necessarily be taking a minute, as it were. That can be done for you. So I think walking meetings is something that I will be building into my model of advising much more this year than I've done in previous years.
Yeah, definitely. No, I love a walking meeting. I love a walking coaching session as well. I often work with some of my coaching clients, and we'll go out and we'll do a session walking, or we'll do sort of part of the session walking, and then we'll come back and then be in a more typical environment to kind of sort of do reflections, actions, next steps, that kind of thing. One of the things that I've plugged for years, I think I did my first ever one of these in like 2013, I think it was. So there's a man called David Pearl, and he came up with this with an organization called Street Wisdom, which is all about solving problems using the wisdom of the street. And the free events happen all of the time. I'll put a link in the show notes to one. You have guides like me who'll do pop-up events all over the world, and you can go turn up and it's free. All you need to do is bring yourself and a question. The question needs to be not as big as what's the meaning of life, and not as small as what am I going to have for dinner. It needs to be kind of somewhere in between. And then your guide will take you through a process that will then help you to answer your question using the wisdom of the street to help you do so. And one of the questions that we use in the phase that's called the tune-up of that is, where do you do your best thinking? And I must have asked hundreds of people that question, and I never ever have heard anybody say in the office at my desk ever. No one does their best thinking in their office at the desk. Consistently, there are elements that show up. Showers are regular ones, or baths, those kind of moments where you're not really thinking about it, but something then pops up just before you go to sleep or just when you wake up. Is another feature.
Long haul flights.
Long haul flights.
Long haul flights at night when everyone else is sleeping. That's been probably some of my best blue sky strategic thinking. It's where I birthed my businesses. We're on long haul flights.
Yeah. So so I think it's wonderful, and so taking people out of that kind of typical context to help to just gives them a different, physically a different perspective, as well as metaphorically a different perspective. So yeah, definitely. Okay, so I think what even that just discussion there does is it sets the stage really well for what we're going to be speaking about today, in terms of environments and pressure, because one of the things I really loved about your book, Dawn, was the way that you structure every chapter around the 7 phases of a butterfly's flight. So before I outline what those are, or maybe you would like to outline what those are, what made you choose that butterfly flight metaphor, and the Red Admiral in particular? What made you choose that to use as a way to kind of structure the different chapters of your book?
So the Red Admiral butterfly is a butterfly that flutters by in my garden and my childhood garden all my life. I can't not remember a summer not seeing them, and they are probably a larger butterfly than most. They stand out. They're very strong in terms of appeal, and there's so many characteristics of that butterfly, even why it exists, how it forms, how it transforms into something even more beautiful, that reminds me of leadership and what leadership can be. that it just seemed to me to be completely logical that something that I have a personal affection for and that gave us a hook in terms of a structure would be useful for the reader. The structuring the book into the elements of of the butterfly actually came later in the process, as I decided I wanted to actually make the book not so structured that you felt like you were reading a textbook, but structured enough that you could put it down and pick it back up again, or you could read a chapter and then, go back a year later and read the chapter again, and the structure would help you go to where you needed to in the chapter or within a part of the book. So that's the reason why we did this, the 7 bits. And the butterfly itself, the key thing to remember about a butterfly is when it starts and it metamorphosizes all the way through to its splendor, everything that the eventual butterfly has, everything the butterfly already needs to be is already present. It just needs to be reorganized. And that for me was really powerful. So everything that we need to be an effective, beautiful, transformative, appealing, inspiring leader is already within us. We can find ways of actually amplifying our impact, building or augmenting around who we are to become that beautiful leader. It's not like we have to rip up the page and start all over again. And that was quite appealing to me. Also means that we're all imperfect and have the opportunity to become something really inspiring and attractive. So that's the reason why the butterfly, and it's the reason why we have the 7 stages.
Wonderful, fantastic. Thank you so much. We already have what we need. It just needs to be organised or reorganised. Yeah, I love that sentiment. Yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah, I like that a lot. Okay.
There's hope for me yet, Phil.
Well, hope for me too, I think. All right, so let's begin with phase 1. So phase 1 is the defining mark. And in the book, you use that to kind of remind the reader of what equality kind of actually means. So where I would like to start is the foundation of the entire concept, because I think the word beautiful has... So I'm a bit of a linguist. I can't remember if I told you that before. So words themselves have kind of semantic, connotative, and collocative meanings. So there's the kind of semantic, what it means in the dictionary. You got the connotative meaning, so the connotations that come with it, and then the collocative meanings, which is the other words that collocate around it regularly. When I think about beautiful, often the some of the other words that collocate around beautiful are to do with kind of appearance, or they're to do with gender, or they're to do with some of those things. So, and you were really clear in the book as to that you were defining beauty not just as, or not as an aesthetic, but as how something is experienced, received, and perceived. And there's a story that kind of sits underneath that, and I wondered if you'd be willing to share a bit about why you chose beautiful leadership and the story that sits behind it, if that's okay.
Yeah, but I'd love to, especially as it's Mothering Sunday coming up in a week or so's time.
Yeah.
So when I chose to leave my law firm in 2010, it was hard work exiting a company I was very loyal to. I left for my own reasons, and still have a good relationship with partners now, but it was still hard. And so I was working out my notice, and I said to my parents, "Oh, can we just go away for a long weekend somewhere? I just could do with a long weekend." And Dad and I conspired that we should go to Turkey. I say conspired because my mum is an incredibly content woman, does particularly like flying. It's not. She finds it difficult, sort of from a balance perspective. So It wasn't really her favourite thing. And so off we went to Turkey. Unfamiliar for her, very familiar for my father and I, and our work environments. Anyway, we stayed in a hotel, unpacked, and went out to have a little bit of an explore. Went to a lovely cafe in some ruins, castle ruins, and this particular waiter made a beeline for my mum and was basically very, very hospitable towards her, and was teaching her some Turkish. And he looked at her in the eyes and he said, "Sen güzelsin," and I've probably butchered that phrase completely, but "Sen güzelsin." And so Mum would say it back, and he would say it again, And then she would say, well, what does that mean? And he said, you are beautiful. And she was very bashful about it. And it really struck me that the words you are beautiful were way bigger than just physical appearance at that moment. It was Mum's heart, her soul, her engagement. She's very sort of forward leaning in the sense that she makes people very comfortable, even though she's naturally quite shy. You know, all of those things is what makes us beautiful. And ever since, if we say those 3 words to my mum, you are beautiful, it will provoke a whole bunch of giggles in our family. So it felt very fitting to include that in the book as our jumping off point, that we must remember that beautiful is so much bigger than the aesthetic and the physical appearance. It's, you know, it's not about adornment or styling. It's everything underneath. You know, it's the hardships, the triumphs, the pain. You know, it's everything that makes us as individuals can be beautiful to experience. So that's why we use the word beautiful as a landing point. And then I have my personal faith also leans into the word beautiful and how that's defined, which is way broader than just the physical appearance. It's, again, it talks about, you know, the inner beauty of the heart. And so, you know, I think we would do well to remember that. And also it brings, which is why I'm on this particular podcast, it brings emotion into it, because you are beautiful because of the sum total of your emotions as well as everything else.
Yeah. And I, you know, the reading the story and then you sort of retelling it there gives me all of the feels, all of the kind of warm and fuzzies along with it. It also reminds me of so one of the an American psychologist called Paul Ekman, who's done an awful lot of research into the world of emotion. One of his kind of pet peeves is how happiness is reduced to just that single word of happiness. And he kind of has written a paper called the 16 pleasurable emotions, I think it's called, which is interesting because there's not actually 16 in the paper. I think there's only 14. But anyway, I guess it just must have rolled off the tongue quite nicely. And in that, he talks about things like awe and wonder, you know, as being, you know, sort of variations or aspects of happiness that often we don't kind of consider, really. You know, we just think happiness is putting a smile on your face and that's it, really. Whereas actually there's an awful lot more to it as well.
Absolutely.
So, sorry, go on.
No, I think happiness. If you badge happiness alongside contentment and humility, you end up actually with something like gratitude. You know, it's like if you were to do if you're going to do a formula of it, I think gratitude is actually what gets you to a place of happiness, no matter your circumstance. Because if we would do well to remember, you can nearly always find something to be grateful for, even in the worst of situations that you find yourself in.
Yeah.
And in that moment, you can feel strangely happy, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what? So you in that story, then you talk about how the waiter kind of saw your mum in her entirety in that moment. So what made you want to take that idea of kind of beautiful leadership and put that into then that kind of core principle, really, for how you think leadership needs to be looked at in a kind of workplace or corporate world?
So if we accept that being beautiful is a useful objective to have as a leader, and you say that that's a foundational, that's our foundation, is I want to be received, perceived, and known as a beautiful leader. You can then break that down into, well, what makes somebody in a leadership role beautiful? And that's then where the framework comes into play. So I looked at the leaders I've worked with over the last 30 years, the deals and projects I've been involved in, and I looked at, you know, what were the things what traits did they have in common by way of characteristics or attributes, and, you know, what was I on the receiving end of that worked well for me as an advisor, and those that didn't. And then I looked at my own leadership and had that sort of, you know, that moment of reflection and, recognition that, there are elements of my own leadership that, could be way more beautiful than perhaps they are at times. And that was distilled into 9 qualities or attributes that each one of those collectively equals the word beautiful. And so that's why we use the word beautiful, because it's a good objective to have. Because if you think about when you're on the receiving end of something that takes your breath away, it could be incredible engineering of a Formula One car, or it could be someone receiving an award at the Pride of Britain Awards, or it could be someone who just it has aesthetic or physical appearance that is just staggeringly beautiful. It could be all of those things. But if you think about how you feel when you are on the receiving end of seeing something as beautiful, that's how a leader should want to feel their leadership is received. So then it's logical to say, well, what would make my leadership be received as beautiful? Hence the nine qualities of the framework. And that's your foundation, but qualities only take you so far. If you want to have that sustainable impact, you need to build. So you need some scaffolding. And so the word leadership, which is a discipline, so leadership is a discipline, it's not a destination. And leadership becomes 10 practices that build your impact as a beautiful leader. And it also means that you have 19 chapters of the book. And luckily for me, it means that even though I'm menopausal with brain fog, I can still remember the 19 things. So that's a bonus.
That's a bonus. And I think that, in my introduction, I mentioned about how it's more than a book, it's also that memorable framework. And I agree with you completely. I think they're using that kind of mnemonic of it just helps you remember what those different elements are. Okay. So if the first moment of the butterfly then is the defining mark, the second phase then is the flight pressure, which you describe as the invisible force that is pushing transformation. And in our kind of call that we had off air, we talked about how leadership issues often kind of bubble up under pressure. I think we were talking about pressure of M&A. And it's not about lack of competence necessarily, it's more about lack of capacity. And so when the flight pressure is intense, how can a lack of capacity manifest in highly competent leaders?
So a lot of my work, as you say, has come from the mergers and acquisitions space or high pressure bid environments. And quite often if you're exiting a company, let's say, it might be the one and only time that senior leadership or shareholder owner team will do this transaction. Number one. Number two, they'll be doing it in secret because those things are typically embargoed just in case it falls over. And number three, it's a highly emotional experience when you are selling your prized possession that you've put heart and soul into for however many years or decades. And so that alone creates a pressure pot environment. So how it manifests is people not necessarily being open and communicative about how they're feeling. So sometimes pride can get in the way when actually what we should be doing is saying, I trust you as an advisor, I trust you as a colleague, I need to tell you that I'm finding this really hard or I'm struggling. But there's often a reluctance to actually be vulnerable and let your guard down. And so that manifests in behaviours that could include aggression, passive aggression, sometimes rather than it being overtly aggressive. It can also result in people, you almost having a bit of a tug of war with the individual you're trying to do the transaction for. I've had deals in the past where I've literally adjourned a meeting and taken the particular exiting owner out of the room and said, right, why are you battling with me on this deal? This is actually in your favour. Do you want to do this deal or not? And of course they do want to do the deal, but they've got a moment of sort of real uncertainty and insecurity around doing it. and that manifests as a behaviour which can derail deals. It can cause confusion amongst the ranks, as it were, or within management teams. So I think those are some areas where I've seen it manifest. People sometimes get noisy or they go quiet. So I think that's what I see a lot in mergers and acquisitions, is that pressure environment. And there's very little you can actually do about it if the deal is secret. You can't expand the group of people to help the leader. So you have to get personal with the individual. You have to get to a place of vulnerability with them, because actually you are it. You are their, for me, I would have been their lawyer, their advisor, their counsellor, at times a therapist, and friend. So the more you can have empathy for someone who is in a high pressured environment, the better. I think sometimes we forget that leaders are nearly always accountable to someone else themselves. They, even if it's themselves with a different hat, director, CEO, and also shareholder, or it could be that there's a family business who have shares. There's somebody else that leader is accountable to, or has to go home to explain the decisions that they've made. So the pressure is extreme at times for those individuals, where they may not have the right answer, in the sense that they may not have clarity, or sorry, they may only have clarity, they won't have certainty. And depending upon the type of leader, some leaders prefer to move only when they have certainty. Other leaders are more prepared to move when they've got enough clarity. And it's not an easy place to be a leader. I'm very protective of leaders, the good ones and the bad ones, because they're all trying in their own way to be as good a leader as they can in their own circumstance and with their own background and makeup. So yeah, it does manifest in many different ways.
And in terms of helping create that capacity, then, so helping create that kind of space for those leaders, maybe in those moments, or more broadly, what might be your, I don't know, somewhere between like 1 and 3 maybe, kind of methods or approaches that you find, or people that you've worked with have found to be quite useful in terms of creating some of that capacity?
Okay, so if I'm thinking about an individual working with a leader or into a leader, so someone who's part of that leader's support team or collegiate team, I think for me, E is for empathy. In the framework in Beautiful, the first E is for empathy, and I can't overstate how important that is, because if you just took this one thought away from today's podcast, maybe we would be able to help leaders more than we anticipated. What if we all got up every morning and went into our environments, our businesses or our companies that we're members of, and we said, what one thing could I do today to take the pressure off my leader? Or what one thing could I do today that would help my leader be better at the things that the leader is there to do? That's if you just paused on that, it immediately takes you into a place of empathy. It takes you into a place of self-awareness. Why am I asking the leader to help me with this? Do I need to? Well, maybe I don't feel empowered. So in the practices, E is for empower. So if I want to help my leader, but I don't feel I can, maybe I need to talk to my leader about them empowering me more. Maybe the leader can't empower me. Well, why can't they empower me? Maybe there's some improvement. Another practice, I is for improve. So I think empathy is a starting point for us really understanding how we can help leaders just by one small action. And if we all did that, and if it was incremental, that would be great. And equally, if a leader turned around and said to their management team or their main support personnel, what can I do better today? One thing. What one thing could I do better today that would help me lead? But I don't know that those conversations go on very openly. Maybe they do at the end of the year when you're having an appraisal or personal development review. But these should be conversations that, now we're back in the office and you can have the water cooler conversations. those are the conversations that should happen at the water cooler. Not necessarily just how was your weekend, but it's actually, recognizing that a leader is a professional, it's a discipline. It may be taken on by them, not because they necessarily are power hungry. I've got lots of leaders I've worked with and work with now who have taken on the leadership role because they feel very responsible and accountable for the business and are doing it at massive sacrifice that goes unseen. So, there are lots of very authentic, well-meaning, intentional leaders who struggle at times. So empathy is one way to help us understand the space that the leader needs. And then the other two I would say is practices is E is for execute. So actually, doing what you are asked to do or doing what is within your remit to do it. It's about everybody doing what they need to do well, so that people don't need to parachute in and micromanage, and that they can be empowered because they can be trusted. And the other one for building space, I think, would be H is for hold. So, when we talk about hold in the book, it splits into three things. Hold off, so which is basically sort of, the art of restraint. Hold out, which is waiting well, and hold on, which is custodianship. So what am I the custodian of in my role, both leader and follower, if I can use that term? What do I need to restrain myself from? So do I need to react really quickly to this? Is it really urgent? Is it really time critical? Or can I build space by actually being more diligent in my use of time? And what do I need to sort of hold off on at times? Patience is a virtue. One of the things that's always frustrated me over the years, and still does if I'm honest, is when I'm asked to produce something or a detailed document, hit a deadline, and I do, and the deadline was never really a deadline in the first place. It drives me to distraction, because I've come from a career where I would bill in 6-minute increments, and so time matters. So every deadline I've ever treated, I've treated it as a real deadline. If we don't need to set deadlines, then that are unrealistic, don't set them. Set realistic deadlines because it gives you space. So those are the three things: empathy, hold, and execution. Those three things alone will help as a practice, both the leader and those who support the leader build space into their environment. And the last thing I would say on empathy is the leader having empathy for what they need. Contrary to popular opinion, they're not superheroes, and they don't actually have, never-ending superpowers. They also have capacity, and so, them having a self-awareness moment and saying, actually, this is too much, or this is a lot, is really, or I'm struggling here. This is something this is not an area I'm particularly familiar with, which I see a lot in M&A. You're selling a business for someone who is an expert in, I don't know, widgets or manufacturing, and all of a sudden I'm expecting them to become a very quick, knowledgeable student of mergers and acquisitions in over a 10-week period. It won't be comfortable for the vast majority of individuals because it's a very new experience for them. So being real and being empathetic towards yourself is as important as a leader, to build capacity and give yourself some space.
Love that. Wonderful. That's fabulous. Thank you, Dawn. Okay, so we've looked at the first two of the 7 stages then. So one was the defining mark, 2 is flight pressure, and then third one is wing notes. Kind of this is around kind of those distilled insights and reflections. So it's where, and you talked about, or in the book anyway, you talk about one of the insights you took from one of your colleagues, I think it was one of your colleagues, was the idea of F.E.A.R. or fear, and reframing fear as false evidence appearing real. Now, we know that fear is a huge emotion for a lot of people. I do get a little bit grumpy sometimes when I read one book once where everything was reduced to fear, and it was all about kind of fear responses and stuff. And it's always a bit more complicated than that because there's more than. But anyway, sorry, I digress.
There I am. I'm being a counsellor.
what would be kind of your reflections, or what would be the insights you would want to share around that kind of concept of fear and the reframe of false evidence appearing real?
So, choosing not to be driven by fear is really, really important for leaders. When I said a little bit earlier around, whether you make a decision or make a move as a leader with certainty or with clarity, the thing that gets in the middle of all of that in the mix is fear. What if, and the judgment that might come from a decision that you've made, especially if you're accountable to external shareholders or an external board. So fear can run rife in a leader, especially in leaders who are not necessarily as equipped as they would like to be. And what I mean by that is, if you have a leader that has been thrust into or has gone into a role and they're neither not ready, or they maybe know that they need to do some personal work around how they show up as a leader, fear will be even more present for those individuals in my experience. And that can cause all sorts of chaos inside the organization because it results in start-stop, miscommunication. It also can provoke a blame culture. So it, at its worst, it can become very, very toxic as an emotion if it's not abated or kept in check. So by the reframe helps us because it just settles us down. It changes our emotional state, our nervous system calms down a little bit rather than the fight or flight that tends to come with fear. And it causes you to be more analytical. So the background to this particular part of the book is that many years ago I was on the receiving end of an ex-client who had been it was a very difficult individual and had made some decisions around his business that had landed him in some sort of trouble in the global financial crisis in 2008-10, and was lashing out. And although I had left the firm, he was lashing out in my direction and other individuals' direction. And I get that, people do lash out. And so it was a very uncertain time for me professionally. It was a very worrying time because it causes you to sort of question absolutely everything and anything. And so my former EA, a lady called Tina, had left and had left the firm a few years before and had become a neurolinguistic trainer and was basically a brilliant performance coach. And I went to see her, and she wrote up on the whiteboard fear, and then she wrote the words false evidence appearing real on the whiteboard, and it literally changed my life because in that moment I had to sit back, be very objective, and say, okay, what are the facts? What is the evidence? Why is it manifesting as being real when actually it's not? And I came away feeling much lighter, much more relaxed, not worrying. And if you do that recalibration exercise, if you look back as an exercise over the things that you've worried about, we all worry, don't we? So maybe your listeners and viewers could look back at one moment in their life which really paralyzed them in terms of professional fear or workplace fear, and then run the false evidence appearing real calibration, because the chances are either what you thought could manifest and happen didn't, or if it did, it didn't happen to the extent that you thought it would. And then you get annoyed with yourself because you realize you've done all this worrying for all these minutes of your life and probably didn't necessarily need to. And even if there is a problem, most problems in business are surmountable one way or another. So it's a really powerful tool. Yes, I'm very thankful to Tina. She still does performance coaching, and you can find her via me on LinkedIn. But she's it was a real gift that she gave me without her really realizing that she had. But that's the art of a good coach, isn't it? You give something without really realizing the value of it for somebody else. But I'm forever grateful to Tina for that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's what you just described there beautifully is what I interpreted the inspiration behind kind of Wing Notes to be, really, which is that kind of insight and reflection in what you described there, and that moment when Tina wrote it on the flip chart or the whiteboard, whichever one it was. Sorry, I can't remember. Was that for you? And so what I'm going to encourage our listeners or our viewers to do then is to do the same. So we're coming up to about halfway through the 7 sort of stages. So this is your opportunity then, fair viewer or fair listener, for you to gather your insights and your reflections from the episode so far. So grab your podcast player or grab your mouse, and then make sure you press pause, take some time to reflect, and then when you're ready, hit play, and then we'll come back with number 4, which is all about being in flight. All right, and welcome back then, fair viewer, fair listener. So stage 4 then, Dawn, is in flight, which is where we kind of see the qualities and the practices showing up in kind of real life. And you share some great stories about leaders in motion. You talk about, I remember one of them that sticks out for me was John, managing partner, who intentionally kind of walked the floors to learn everybody's name. And you got Lexi earning her beads of courage. So for leaders who might feel like they're too busy, I mean, I see this in one of my kind of key clients that I'm working with at the moment. It's almost like, to be a credible colleague, you have to be really busy. Like if you're not super busy, then like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing if you're not super busy? So if they are like feeling that too busy, how do those kind of in-flight moments of bravery or empathy actually serve as a real kind of true differentiator of them as a leader?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that, leadership is an individual journey. So, you don't have to lead because that's how people think, how you perceive people think you should be leading. So, you need to lead in whatever way is going to bring out the best in you and your competence and your contribution, without it being at the expense of your personal well-being or sanity or life outside of the workplace. And I say that feeling like a little bit of a fraud because I'm probably a really bad example of that at times, and it's certainly bitten me. Certainly recently it bit me before Christmas. We talk about that a bit later, but yes. So the first thing is it's an individual journey, so it's what works for you. The empathy and the bravery part also tells us that we don't, just because you have leader behind you as a title doesn't mean that everybody else doesn't lead. Leadership is for everybody, and I think that's why I included Lexi and B is for brave as a quality, because of her journey, her health journey at a tender young age of 9, was absolutely extraordinary, and the bravery that she showed and that she modelled to me and to other adults around her was nothing short of incredible. So I think being brave is basically about owning your own leadership, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and actually having that awareness, as we talked before, the empathy, also being strong in terms of execution. So if I'm going to execute my role, then I need other people to execute theirs. So leadership is not for the faint-hearted. Sometimes hard conversations need to happen because it will help the leader lead better, and it will also hopefully encourage the other individual to grow into their own potential. And the importance of space is you have to guard it, and because if you don't guard it, it will be stripped from you. Best intentions and all that. Some of the most impressive leaders I've ever worked with, and I think I talk about this in S's for Space, just have this aura around them. They are strangely unbusy. They are poised. They do a lot of thinking. They have huge empowerment to team members around them, which is well received and then owned with honour. So it's not that you empower and then it falls apart. The individuals they choose well, and those individuals really own their roles. They are stewards of what is within their role. So some of these leaders that I talk about them having an aura, and it's things like, they have a very clear routine. They demarcate work life and home life. They are very private individuals. They are learners. They are persistent learners. None of these leaders who have space have stopped learning. They're always learning. They're always doing some kind of part-time study. They've all got coaches. They've all got executive assistants guarding their time and helping them to manage their time better. And the leader lets them, which is not all leaders actually enable their EAs.
Yeah.
I've been guilty of this at times, not actually helping my EA help me. But those leaders all have those attributes around them, and they don't subscribe to, in order to show my worth, I need to be the busiest person, working the longest hours. It's more about impact for them, and they know what is within their wheelhouse and what's not. And I think that's really powerful, especially if you come up through an organization into leadership. You leave a role behind, you step into something new, but quite often there's a rump of the role you had before that seems to travel with you into the next role, into the next leading role.
Yep.
And so that just makes you even busier and even fuller, when actually you need to probably be shedding elements of your prior activity. Some leaders do, some leaders don't, some leaders don't want to. Some leaders are reluctant to move up into their in and through organizations. Wouldn't necessarily be obvious, but it might manifest in behaviors. Yeah, so I think really owning what your leadership needs to be and then modeling yourself into that will help you build space and capacity.
Wonderful.
And what happens if you don't? If you don't do it, Phil, you won't deliver the leadership you need to deliver. Then that will be something you'll become accountable for anyway. You might not be growing people to take on your role in the future, or at least even if they're not taking on your role, to have the capacity to do elements of your activity. And it could manifest in a health issue or a scare,
Yeah. Okay. And I know we spoke off air that that might be something that you wanted to explore today. And you mentioned it a couple of times then in your responses there. Is it something would you like to kind of expand on in this moment, or do you think it might fit better in terms of something we talk about in stretch, landing points, or release?
I think let's touch on it now, because it might just help your listeners and your viewers
please.
to sort of relate a little bit. So I've been a sort of always on, always at full power kind of individual, and I'm nearly 30 years into my professional life, and I've never really questioned my operating model. This is how I show up, and I get to deliver at a high level, and it works. And yes, I know there's lots of sacrifice, but lots of other people sacrifice as well. So crack on until second week of December. So 11th of December, I ended up in an ambulance with acute abdominal pain, having ruled out a heart attack. And I ended up with jaundice, acute pancreatitis, 3 infections in and around my gallbladder, and enormous gallstones, which were laying dormant until they weren't. And so I was a very poorly individual. I was told a number of times that I was in a life-threatening situation, and I had surgery in mid-January, so I'm 5 or 6 weeks post-op now. This is the first thing I've done since the 11th of December that's sort of out there in terms of being aired. And what I learned in that process was that my operating model no longer suits me, or I no longer suit it. Not sure which way around it is, but I have to there are some changes that I need to make in my life in order to be able to show up sustainably in the future, rather than have another part of my body tell me that, the way you do it, Dawn, isn't actually the best way you can do it. And I wish it hadn't have taken a health scare, but it probably needed to for me, because I'm a bit sort of relentless. So it would have taken something like this for me to have had a wow moment, a real moment of pause. So I think that when we overstretch our capacity, or when we don't give ourselves space, we are brewing up trouble. And that trouble can either be at a health level, Could be at an emotional level, could be a familial or a relationship level, or it could be at a corporate level in terms of how you're preparing the business for the future. If you're doing too much of the activity and others aren't. So the big lesson for me in all of it is actually reframing my operating model so that it works. That might mean putting in place boundaries. So S is for, so in the book leadership, S is for space and setting boundaries. You can't create space without having boundaries. Setting boundaries with clients who you may have worked with, in my case for like over a quarter of a century, isn't easy because there's a learned behaviour. They've learned this version of Dawn, not the new version of Dawn. So that's going to take some communication and work between myself and my clients. But it's really powerful work to do. And what's been surprising, Phil, is how many people have said thank you when I've shared, because they've also had health crisis or they've had a warning sign and they've not known how to actually approach it because they're fearful. False evidence appearing real. If I show up different, I won't get promotion. If I show up different, I won't have the client loyalty, etc. Actually, my experience is that my clients have been absolutely phenomenal. They're human at the end of the day and they're emotional, right? So they have empathy. So yes, I would just say if there's something in your operating model that you know deep down needs some adjustment, whether it's sleep, health, fitness, whatever it is, please pay attention to it, because what you model also is what people see. And if you model it well, it means that other people who may be going through their own moments of, oh, I need to adjust my settings, as it were, or I need more training, or I could do with having a coach or some more personal development. If you model it well and you recognise your imperfections and you look at the practice of improvement, it helps other people coming through. That's really powerful. That to me is probably the most important message that I can give to leaders right now is none of us are expected to have it all together, and all of us are going to have challenges from time to time. Don't hide. Don't think that it's a vulnerability you can't share. Acknowledge and accept those things as difficulties or imperfections or challenges. Seek to improve it, and have people come alongside you to help you, whether that's through empowering them or allowing them to be empathetic towards you. And you'd be amazed how people will show up for you.
Well, thank you so much, Dawn. I love that, and I think within that story, you also demonstrated that transparency, the imperfection, and also the adaptation as well. That's needed to that's needed as well. So yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. So the fifth element then you define as stretch, which offers suggestions to shift our mindset over time. And you have an example in your chapter about empathy where you talk about the empathy tank. And so, and feel free to expand on the empathy tank if you would like to. And at the same time, feel free to pick something different if you would like. What's important to you about that stretch kind of component? What is it around stretch that you think, or that metaphor of stretch that you want to take from that kind of Red Admiral butterfly that is really useful, you think, for the listener to hear?
So stretch is where you build capacity, but you can only have the capacity you want if you're prepared to do the work that you need to do. So, Red Admiral butterfly can fly for extraordinarily long lengths of time, goes from down to the Mediterranean and back, and it doesn't just do that, unrehearsed. It prepares itself and it stretches itself as it does it. Every movement of the butterfly's wings is a stretch in itself to get you somewhere. So I think with leadership, there's a danger in leadership of a I've arrived mentality, when actually really you've only just begun. So for me, stretch for a leader is accepting that I've only just begun, and I need to constantly check in with myself that I don't have an I've arrived mentality.
Nice.
And that's actually all about being unpretentious. in the book we talk about that as a quality.
Yeah.
You can also call it humility. So stretch is where we wed acknowledging our imperfections, accepting what we find difficult, being unpretentious about our role, and transparent about our needs, and then seeking to improve, and then putting it into practice. So that's where stretch brings the elements of the framework together, I think. And it gives and it doesn't need necessarily to be an enormous stretch. You think about Pilates and others like Tai Chi and things. It's slow, gentle stretches. It's not massive muscle moves. Rome wasn't built in a day kind of metaphor. You can take your time. The point is that you recognise that there's work to do, or that there's improvement to make. So that's where stretch comes from. And with empathy and the empathy tank, it's really just recognizing what gives us empathy, and then making sure that and this is a really important point I want to stress. It's not about whether we have it all within us. If you take beautiful leadership and say, oh, I need to have these 19 things, I need to have these 10 attributes, these 9 attributes, and these 10 disciplines or practices. That's not what this book is saying. This book is saying, understand who you are and how you show up in beautiful leadership. And within that, you will identify your superpowers. As my coach, Mike, would say, what are your superpowers and what's your kryptonite? So, I know what my superpowers are. Empathy is one of them. And I know what my kryptonite is. Space, hold have been two of my kryptonite areas. So once you know what it is that you have by way of empathy, you'll know where you're lacking or where you've got blind spots. And there's nothing wrong in having a blind spot. The problem is if you don't adjust the mirror or have an additional mirror to help you see it or make the observation. So in the book, it talks a lot around leadership isn't just about one person. It goes back to what one thing can I do to help that individual be a better leader, but it's also about what the leader needs to make their leadership whole.
Yeah.
And that's a team effort. It's why in the qualities we talk about, U is for uplifting in the second U. It's not about the leader being the sole answer. It's about, I think, leadership is about steering the ship being your company of employees, colleagues, suppliers, contractors, stakeholders, leading the ship in such a way that you basically end up with best effect. So if a leader is really strong in execution and making strategic decisions in the absence of certainty, but is maybe so quick paced that they might lack in empathy in the moment, have somebody within your team, within your senior leadership team, who brings that attribute into the mix and engage with that individual to help your leadership be whole. And that to me is really important. It's not leadership of one, it's leadership through many. And when we look at the empathy building blocks, it's quite useful because you can see maybe areas where you've got, I'm 10 out of 10 on that, or I know at times, especially when the pressure's on, empathy changes under pressure. So I'm not as empathetic when I'm under pressure, or I'm hitting a very time sensitive moment, or if a client has complained or is unhappy, I definitely lack in empathy towards my team in those moments, and I have to check myself. And I check myself by looking at my blocks. So my blocks, I'll just quickly read them out, are personal resilience. So if you don't have resilience yourself, your ability to show empathy to others is harder. Faithfulness to role. If you don't understand your role, or it's not really the thing that you are the main custodian of, empathy might be imbalanced. Are you listening actively, or are you just listening to speak? Are you seeking to understand, or do you already think you understand? Different. Are you being transparent to giving people space to be vulnerable themselves? Are you giving and holding space for yourself and for others? And are you self-aware? And in particular, in the time that we now live in, are you recognizing and challenging your own unconscious bias? and prejudices that you may well have. And the last one is the 3 P's of perspective, patience, and permission. So, giving yourself permission to feel, being patient with how you feel or how others are explaining how they feel towards a situation, and trying to put yourself into their shoes. So perspective is all important. Now, you might not have all of that stuff nailed. I don't, and that's okay. What makes your leadership whole is actually about other people in your mix.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And you may have unknowingly referenced one of my favourite books I got introduced to last year, which is a book called Permission to Feel. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. It's a great book. Okay, all right. So we have then. So we started off with the defining mark. Then we talked about flight pressure. Then we talked about wing notes being in flight, stretch. So we've got 2 elements to go then. So we've got landing points and release. So I guess in a way, as we're approaching the end of this podcast, I suppose in a way, we need to start thinking about kind of the landing points that we may have. And part 2 of your book focuses on those leadership practices, of which we've actually worked our way through quite a lot. We've talked about listening, we talked about execution, adaptation, empowerment. We talked about space, we talked about holding, and for improvement as well. And you talked about practice as well in that last one. So what would be for you kind of one practical landing point? And I suppose maybe it's one more, because I feel like you've given quite a lot as you've worked our way through this episode already. What would be one kind of practical landing point element do you think that somebody, a listener or a viewer, could take away and use tomorrow?
What would make my leadership whole? Or what would make my leader whole? Are the
Nice.
the 2 points, I think. Because actually if you then work through the framework with if you take that statement, those questions, and you work through the framework, you'll figure it out.
Love that. Wonderful. Yeah. Okay. And as we come on to release then, which is where we reflect on what we hold on to and take forward. And you've said already in this episode that leadership is a discipline, not a definition. In the book, you also sort of define it as a human endeavour, not a robot. Mm-hmm. And so if a highly competent leader wants to join our army of beautiful leaders, but is terrified of maybe not being perfect, what's the final thought that you would like them to release so that they can move forward?
Well, final thought is congratulations, you've accepted you're not perfect. I think that's the key, isn't it? It's I've had the gift in my profession of people needing my advice and taking it for many years, and I say that with great humility because it's a hugely privileged position for me to be in, to speak with and advise and work with leaders, often in their most vulnerable, uncertain moments. I get to see the real person behind the leadership title, and not one of them are perfect. And those who accept that they aren't and do the work are my beautiful leaders. And so for me, the thing to release is you don't need to be a perfect leader. You just need to be beautiful. That's it. It's really as simple as that. It's choosing to have all of your, imperfections, difficulties and challenges combined with your competency and say, this is how I show up. And then doing the work or asking others to help you make your leadership whole. And that there's nothing to fear if you do that. Mm-hmm. False evidence appearing real. If you have a stakeholder group or an owning group that doesn't show up with compassion when you articulate, a vulnerability or a need, which might mean I need more people, I need more capacity. If you haven't got, an environment which actually receives that in a human way, then maybe you shouldn't be in that role anyway, in that organisation, with that organisation. So that takes bravery. But yeah, that's what I would say. I would just say it's all about realising that we don't have to be perfect. And it's interesting, actually, when I was when I was building the website for beautifulleader.com, and I was looking at stock photos for for the Red Admiral butterfly, there are all sorts of beautiful pictures from fantastic photographers, and I found myself trying to find the most perfect picture of a butterfly, because I thought that if I had a picture of the Red Admiral with a chunk out of a wing, what would that say? It looks a bit ugly, looks a bit messy, and actually what I should probably do is find some of those uglier photos of my beautiful Red Admiral butterfly and put that on the website as a statement that we come with all of our scars into leadership.
Yeah, love that. All right, so as we start to kind of move towards the close then, so we'll I'll ask you a bit more about if there's any sort of other resources that you would recommend, and also how people want to get in contact with you. The way that I like to kind of move away from the kind of, I guess, everything we've talked about so far and into this final section is to ask one of my favorite questions, which is, in your journey to beautiful leadership, what surprised you along the way?
Just how much work I have to do.
Yeah.
as in, I say that sort of flippantly because it never ceased to amuse me. And there's a sentence in the book where I said, when I started writing this book, I thought I was writing this book for you, and I've actually realised that I was writing this book for me. And so, and it's certainly in the last 3 months, I've been living, S is for taste, H is for hold, I is for improve, and P is for practice. So, I have literally been living elements of this book in a way that I hadn't anticipated. So I've learned an enormous amount about myself in the last sort of 18 months of this book project, which I think will be for the good. And that I hadn't necessarily anticipated just how much I would get out of writing the book and thinking about the framework. And hopefully that will translate into me showing up as in terms of competence experience with the leaders I work with, in a way that they need me to for their moment in time. So I've become an author and a student at the same time in a way that I hadn't anticipated. And the other thing that I think I would say is that there's a natural move from each attribute to the next, and from each practice to the next and across. So, if you feel like you're lacking in empathy, or empathy tank is depleted, just go and have a look in the practices, because the practices will help you build up your empathy tank. So my empathy tank is low. Okay, well, I need to focus on my listening. I need to give myself more space. I need to be patient. I need to hold. I need to improve certain things about how I show up when I need to be empathetic, and vice versa. So, why am I not listening well? Well, maybe I'm not having enough empathy. Maybe I'm not being transparent to help the individual be vulnerable towards me. So there's a natural blending towards the two, which when I wrote the book, in each chapter on its own, that wasn't immediately evident until I started to do the knitting between each chapter. And then I realised that it was probably more powerful than I had anticipated it would be. So that's a nice thing to have realised at the end of writing the book.
And it unifies it all together really well.
Yeah. And it's memorable. 19 things. I can remember 19 things.
Love that. Fabulous. All right. So if people wanted to get hold of the book then, Dawn, how would they do that?
So there's 2 ways to do it. Later on this year, we'll have an Audible version, but that's been slightly delayed because of my own sort of health situation and pause moments. So at the moment, you can get hold of a hardback or a softback copy either from thebeautifulleader.com, and that's if you're a UK-based individual. And if you do it that way, then I will gladly sign a copy of the book and put a personal note into it for you, which gives me great joy. And if you're international, I can't do that for you, unfortunately. Please go to amazon.com. But if ever we were to meet, I'm more than happy to write a note on it at that point. That's the 2 ways to do it.
Wonderful. And I'll pop links to both of those in the show notes as well. So if you're listening or watching, then you can get hold of those links really easily. And if people want to get in touch with you, Dawn, what's the best way for people to get in touch?
So the best way to get in touch with me is via LinkedIn. I've got a relatively unusual surname, so you can find me that way. You can also find me through thebeautifulleader.com. There's a contact us site. Or you can go through my professional consultancy email address, which is dawn.stallwood@floodlightbusiness.com.
Fabulous. And we'll put links to all of those in the show notes as well. So all that leads me to say then, Dawn, is there something else or something more that you are thinking, feeling, or would like to say before we close?
I would say that if there have been books in your life that have been really inspirational, then those books are really important and they're worth sharing. I say that because this writing exercise was provoked by two books that I have read and reread for the last 15, 17 years. One is called Half Time by a gentleman called Bob Burford, Buford, and it talks about living your life in two chunks, two halves, with an intentional bit in the middle where you work out what you do next, hence writing a book at 50. And the second book was a book called The Consultant's Calling by Jeffrey Bellman. And it's all about showing up as a professional consultant, which can mean basically any of us, where emotion is at the heart of what we do within our professional sphere. Those two books shaped a lot of how I've shown up and the decision to write this book. So I would just say, if there are books that have been inspirational, share those with people because they can change your life.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, Dawn, all I can say is thank you so much for a beautiful podcast episode. It's been absolutely wonderful to listen with you, to hear your thoughts, and for you to share share your stories, share your thinking, share your expertise. It's been absolutely beautiful. So thank you so much. And thank you for coming on the Emotional Work podcast.
For my absolute pleasure. Thank you.